Well, greetings. This is week 2, lecture 1. So last week we dealt with some of the more broad or macro level barriers that we currently face when thinking and working through what it means to Christian neighbor well. We talked about the culture of fear that seems so prevalent today. We talked about the nature of the divisive political discourse and how that continues to impact and probably even preempt our ability to stand in meaningful relationships with one another. And we finished by discussing the current confusion surrounding even the word evangelical and the presuppositions that often carries with us into our engagement with someone else. This week, I want to bring that from the macro level and begin to think in terms of on the micro level, on that day-to-day, life-on-life way of what makes neighboring so difficult. In Who is My Neighbor by Wayne Gordon, he utilizes the story of Good Samaritan to find the nature of what it means to be and to see the neighbor. And I love his use of scripture in that way. In fact, I might suggest that on the micro level, what we get is that the more the revelation of scripture, particularly the stories and the parables of Jesus, begin to refine our imagination about the possibilities of neighboring and challenge some of the unconfessed practices and assumptions that you and I bring to neighboring. One of my favorite stories about Jesus in terms of this is when Jesus is on his way to heal Jairus' daughter in Mark chapter 5. It's a story that I think sort of captures the heart of Jesus, who lives well, intentionally, mercifully, empathetically, and faithfully among others, among those that we would call neighbors. In this particular story, Jesus is on his way somewhere important to do something important, to heal a man's dying daughter. However, on his way, he's met by this super stealthy, bold, broken woman who grabs a hold of his tzitzit on his talit, or that prayer shawl that he wears. In this passage, we see something extraordinary, especially in our culture. And that extraordinary act isn't the healing itself. At least I don't think so. I think it's his willingness to take time, to notice the unnoticeable, to seek and speak to the unacceptable, and to befriend the friendless. And even though Jesus is on his way somewhere important, he stops and takes notice of this young lady, speaking to the dignity and the wholeness of her life. Taking time is the call of neighboring, which means our agendas of busyness are often a bind to our capacity to live out that call. I'll never forget early in my journey, I was in the military, and I was learning to live day by day by my faith, staying attuned to the voice of God and trying to take my directions from God. I was walking through the military hospital on the post that I was stationed at, and there at the end of the hall was this large man sitting on this bench, and he was sitting under this sign that said labor and delivery, and he was crying. And I remember hearing what I believed to be at the time the voice of the Lord saying to me, stop and talk to him. And I thought, absolutely, I will after I finish this meeting that I'm running late to. So I moved past him on my way somewhere important, finished my meeting, and when I got back to that place, the man was gone. And I remember walking past that bench, feeling a sensation of deep conviction come over me, and realizing that I was supposed to speak to, befriend a neighbor, and become a neighbor to a man who was in a deep emotional place. And I knew that God had sort of directed me to that. I had failed to be this man's neighbor. I wish I could tell you that I've fixed that since then, but I've learned, and that I've completely learned the error of my ways, and that like Jesus, I'm ready to be inconvenienced or delayed or distracted by someone who's in my presence. But I, like many of us, often find myself too busy to slow down, too busy to notice, or too busy to stop. And I think this is one of the barriers that we face in Christian neighboring, and one that I believe that we have to reckon with if we're going to neighbor well, and it is a culture of busyness. We live in a world that often prides itself with how many irons that we have in the fire, how much we have going at any given time, especially I think in the church. We've established ministries that keep us as a clergy so busy attending to the affairs of the church, running meetings, building programs, calculating budgets, mentoring staff, meeting disgruntled parishioners, that we've little time to even know the names of the neighbor next door to us, turning us often into the priest or the Levite in the story of the Good Samaritan. And likewise, I think our programming at our churches often extracts people from their communities and neighborhoods, especially when you're talking in terms of those drive-in regional churches. it has us coming to a location away from another location. And my faith journey does little to impact the immediate context or neighborhood that I find myself, because folks on Sunday mornings are at church, Sunday evenings at a meeting, small group on Tuesday nights, church on Wednesday night, and all that time of going to a building means that they're exiting their communities and their neighborhoods. But this culture of busyness isn't simply indicative of the church either. It's the broader culture as well. We suffer from our inability to say no to our children. Gone are the days of pickup games in the neighborhood, backyard, and the spontaneous sleepover. Now you've got to schedule a play date in the midst of our children's already overwhelmed schedules. Now everything has to be scheduled around the kids' frenetic schedules, in which we move from one event to the next, one team to the next, one club to the next, one lesson to the next. We can't invite our neighbors over for dinner because we're never home to eat dinner. Our cars are littered with fast food remnants, and our garbage cans carry the remnants of pizza boxes that we stopped late on the way home at 8 p.m. to grab. And it's not just that either, right? We're always on the move. We're even planning where we're heading next when we're stopped. So we're never truly present where we are. And we regularly post about our busyness on social media to send the message to those around us: admire me, feel sorry for me, but don't expect much from me because I can't slow down. And it's not just that. It's also the extra hours that people work to gain the kind of lifestyle that they've always sought. The longer the commutes people make to move further from their place of business to own a larger house in a better, safer neighborhood for less money that they're never really available to enjoy because they're never home long enough to enjoy it. Neighboring takes time. It requires us to simplify our lives and be more attendant to the rhythms of the lives of those around us. We can't notice a neighbor that might be sick, even though the newspapers are piling up or there's a traveling nurse that stops by, because we don't take the time to pay attention. I've fallen prey to this. We roll in either into our garage or into the front of our house, run inside to send the message, I'm on my way somewhere else. Busyness will always be a barrier to good neighboring and a bind for us if we truly want to live out what it means to be neighborly. This culture of busyness has led us to the illusion of connection. We've substituted meaningful interactions with our social media haze, right? Our relationships often buffered through a number of different algorithmic filters, and they lack meaningful presence and engagement. Our interactions are often surface. Our misinterpretations are plentiful. Our offenses are many. The side of ourselves we've presented is filtered. And though we're the most connected people in terms of accessibility, we are regularly considered by many social scientists as the most lonely. If social media and the iPhone had existed in the time of Jesus, Zacchaeus remains unnoticed in the tree because of the selfie that Jesus and the disciples would have been taking. The suffering man remains in the ditch because the Samaritan is too busy pinning decorative ideas to his Pinterest board to even acknowledge him. The broken woman wetting the feet of Jesus would have remained unnoticed because Jesus would have been too busy tweeting about the injustice of life to do anything about the injustice right in his midst. See, that's what happens when we live in the illusion of our connectivity. Our sense of busyness and our disconnectedness as a result of our craned necks and our glowing faces keeps us from being able to connect deeply or to slow down long enough to do so, to look around, to recognize those around us, to step out, to step up, and to step into the life of someone that might otherwise go unrecognized or unnoticed. Neighboring requires a pace that makes opportunity for presence. Neighboring requires a presence that isn't distracted but attentive, both of which we suffer from in our culture. And in the next lecture, we're going to talk about the issue of neighboring in light of our culture's propensity to think of ourselves in terms of rugged individualism and voluntary association.